The fluorescent lights of courtroom 12B buzzed overhead like angry wasps trapped in glass. Judge Walter Harmon squinted down at the defendant, the fifth juvenile case of the morning, and his patience was wearing thin. The boy slouched in his chair, head down, with short dreadlocks partially hiding his face. His orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his lanky frame. "Straighten up when you're in my courtroom," Judge Harmon snapped, his voice echoing against the wood-paneled walls. "And look at me when I'm speaking to you, Mr." He glanced down at the file. "Mr. Marcus Washington." The public defender, Lisa Reeves, placed a gentle hand on her client's shoulder. "Your Honor, if I may." "You may not, Ms. Reeves," Judge Harmon interrupted. "Not until your client shows this court the respect it deserves." The 16-year-old boy slowly raised his head. His eyes, deep brown and defiant, met the judge's. The courtroom, packed with the usual morning bustle of attorneys, clerks, and those awaiting their moment before the bench, grew unusually quiet. Judge Walter Harmon had sat on the Fulton County bench for 23 years. At 62, his once black hair had faded to steel gray, and the lines around his mouth had deepened into permanent furrows. His reputation for being tough but fair had morphed over the years into something harsher, especially when it came to juvenile repeat offenders. "Shoplifting, again," Judge Harmon said, peering over his reading glasses. "Third offense this year. Plus truancy, trespassing, and now resisting arrest." He shook his head. "Tell me, Mr. Washington, why shouldn't I revoke your probation right now and remand you to juvenile detention until your 18th birthday?" Marcus remained silent. "Nothing to say for yourself?" The judge's voice dripped with disdain. "Another young man throwing his life away. Another statistic." Lisa Reeves stood up. "Your Honor, my client has experienced significant trauma recently. His mother passed away just 3 months ago, and Ms. Reeves," Judge Harmon cut in again, "I sympathize with personal tragedy, but this court sees tragic backgrounds every day. Loss doesn't excuse lawlessness." He turned his attention back to Marcus. "Son, do you think you're special? That the rules don't apply to you?" Marcus's jaw tightened. His eyes never left the judge's. "No, sir," he finally said, his voice stronger and clearer than the court had expected. "Then explain yourself," demanded Harmon. "Enlighten us all on why you thought it appropriate to steal merchandise from Alexander's department store, then run from security and physically resist the responding officer." The courtroom waited. The court reporter's fingers hovered over her stenotype machine. Even the bailiff, who had seen it all, seemed interested in the boy's response. "I needed clothes for a job interview," Marcus said simply. A smirk crossed Judge Harmon's face. "A job interview? And what job might that be?" "Busboy at Riverside Grill. And stealing was your solution? Rather than, say, applying for assistance programs or reaching out to community resources?" Marcus looked down again, his shoulders tensing. "I did. They take too long." The interview was the next day. Judge Harmon removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "This is the problem with your generation. Immediate gratification. No patience, no work ethic." He leaned forward. "When I was your age, I worked 2 jobs to put myself through college. I didn't steal. I didn't make excuses." In the gallery, a man in a well-worn gray suit shifted uncomfortably. He'd been watching the proceedings carefully, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Dr. James Richardson, head of sociology at Emory University and court-appointed monitor for juvenile proceedings, had seen Judge Harmon in action before. He made a note in his small leather-bound notebook. "Your Honor," Lisa Reeves tried again. "If I could direct the court's attention to Marcus's academic record before his mother's illness, Ms. Reeves, his past performance makes his current choices even more disappointing." Judge Harmon turned back to Marcus. "Do you know what the recidivism rate is for juvenile offenders who continue down this path?" "Over 60%. That's your future, son. A revolving door of courtrooms and cells." Marcus finally broke his stoic demeanor. "You don't know anything about me or my future." The judge's eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me. You talk about when you were my age. You had 2 parents. You had a home. You didn't watch your mother die of cancer while working night shifts to pay for medicine that didn't even work. Marcus's voice remained level, but emotion simmered beneath the surface. You don't know what it's like to be me. So don't act like you do. The courtroom fell completely silent. Even the usual shuffling of papers ceased. Judge Harmon's face flushed red. Young man, your contempt, it's not contempt, Your Honor, Marcus interrupted. It's the truth. Assistant District Attorney Caroline Winters, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, suddenly stood. Your Honor, may we approach the bench? Judge Harmon, still glaring at Marcus, nodded curtly. The sidebar lasted only a few minutes, but the whispered conversation between the judge, the ADA, and the public defender grew increasingly animated. When they returned to their positions, Judge Harmon's demeanor had subtly shifted. We'll take a 15-minute recess, he announced abruptly. Court will resume at 11:45. In his chambers, Judge Harmon loosened his tie and fell heavily into his leather chair. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Enter, he called. Dr. Richardson stepped in, notebook still in hand. Judge Harmon. Do you have a moment? I know what you're going to say, James. The judge rubbed his temples. I was too harsh on the Washington boy. It's not just that, Walter. Dr. Richardson took a seat opposite the judge's desk. I've been monitoring your courtroom for 6 months now. There's a pattern emerging in how you handle certain juvenile cases. Judge Harmon stiffened. If you're implying what I think you're implying, I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Black and brown juveniles receive sentences from your court that are, on average, 24% longer than their white counterparts for similar offenses. That's absurd. I judge each case on its merits. The data suggests otherwise. Dr. Richardson placed his notebook on the desk. And your interaction with Marcus Washington was troubling. Judge Harmon leaned back in his chair. The boy has a record and an attitude. He also has a 3.8 GPA, or did, until his mother's illness. He was on track for a scholarship. Richardson paused. Did you review his complete file? The judge's silence was answer enough. There's something else you should know about Marcus, Dr. Richardson continued. Something that didn't make it into his file. As Judge Walter Harmon drove home that evening, he thought about the hundreds of juveniles who had stood before him over the years. How many Marcus Washingtons had he failed to see? How many futures had he altered with his assumptions and his pride? He couldn't change those past decisions. But tomorrow, when he took the bench in courtroom 12B, he would really look, at the human being standing before him. And perhaps, in doing so, he might find redemption for them both. The following Monday, Judge Harmon arrived at the courthouse earlier than usual. He had a full docket of juvenile cases and wanted time to review each file thoroughly before court convened. As he passed through security, the guard handed him a sealed envelope along with his keys and phone. Delivered for you this morning, Judge. Messenger said it was important. In his chambers, Harmon opened the envelope and removed a single sheet of paper. It was a copy of a college acceptance letter addressed to Marcus Washington from Georgetown University, with a full scholarship to their pre-law program. Paperclip to it was a handwritten note. Judge Harmon, you once asked if I thought I was special. The truth is, I'm not. There are thousands of kids like me in courtrooms across this country every day. The difference is that someone finally saw me, not just my mistakes, but my potential. You taught me that justice isn't just about punishment, it's about recognition. Thank you for recognizing me. Marcus P.S. I'll be applying for that summer internship. Judge Harmon carefully folded the letter and placed it in his wallet, where it would remain for years to come, a reminder of the day justice was served not by a harsh sentence, but by a second look at a young man who simply needed someone to see him for who he truly was. As he donned his robe and prepared to enter courtroom 12B, Judge Walter Harmon made a silent promise to the day's defendants. To Marcus and to himself, today and every day forward, he would look beyond the file, beyond his assumptions, beyond even the law, to see the humanity standing before him. Because sometimes, justice wears not only a blindfold but also a mirror. Reflecting back our own prejudices and possibilities, sometimes, justice begins with recognition. When court resumed, the energy in room 12B had shifted. Judge Harmon returned to the bench looking somehow older, the lines in his face deeper. Marcus sat straighter in his chair, as if he'd made a decision during the recess. "Mr. Washington," Judge Harmon began, his tone noticeably different. "I've had an opportunity to review your full case file more thoroughly." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "It has come to my attention that on the night of your arrest, you were not only attempting to secure clothing for a job interview but were also trying to obtain appropriate attire for your mother's funeral, which took place 2 days later." Lisa Reeves looked surprised. This detail hadn't been in her notes. "Is that correct?" the judge asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I also understand that despite your current circumstances, you've continued to attend school when possible. And you've been caring for your 9-year-old sister in the absence of other family members." Marcus swallowed hard. "Someone has to, sir." Judge Harmon removed his glasses and set them on the bench. For the first time that morning, he really looked at the young man before him, not as a case number or a statistic, but as a human being, carrying an impossible burden. "Ms. Reeves, what alternatives to detention has your office explored for Mr. Washington?" The public defender seemed caught off guard by the judge's shift. We've considered placement with his aunt in Savannah. But transportation and housing logistics were problematic. There's also a community supervision program, but given his sister's situation, and what about the Carter Youth Mentorship Program?" Judge Harmon asked. Ada Winters frowned. "Your Honor, that program is typically reserved for first-time offenders. I'm aware of the program's usual parameters, Ms. Winters." The judge turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Washington, are you familiar with Judge Solomon Carter?" Marcus shook his head. Judge Carter was the first black judge appointed to this circuit, back in 1978. He grew up in the same neighborhood you're from, Southview Gardens. Like you, he lost a parent at a young age. Like you, he faced obstacles. Judge Harmon's voice softened almost imperceptibly. Unlike you, he didn't have anyone to intervene when he made a mistake at 16. He spent 2 years in juvenile detention. The courtroom remained silent, hanging on the judge's every word. After he became a judge, he established the mentorship program to provide what he didn't have, a second chance with support, not just punishment. Judge Harmon paused. "The program has limited spots and they are competitive." Marcus's expression remained guarded, but there was a flicker of something new in his eyes, a cautious hope. "Your Honor," Ada Winters began, "given the defendants repeat offenses, Ms. Winters," Judge Harmon interrupted, "I'd like to hear from Dr. Richardson." Dr. Richardson rose from his seat in the gallery and approached the witness stand. "Dr. Richardson, you've reviewed Mr. Washington's case history and personal background, correct?" "I have, Your Honor." "And in your professional opinion, is Mr. Washington a candidate for rehabilitative intervention rather than detention?" Dr. Richardson nodded. "Not only a candidate, Your Honor, but precisely the type of young person who most benefits from structured support rather than incarceration. His academic history shows significant promise, and his current circumstances, while challenging, represent situational rather than pathological factors in his recent behavior." Judge Harmon nodded. "Thank you, Doctor." He turned back to Marcus. "Mr. Washington, approach the bench, please." Marcus glanced at his attorney, who nodded encouragingly. He rose and walked forward until he stood directly before the judge. Up close, Judge Harmon could see the fatigue in the boy's eyes, the weight of adult responsibilities etched in the set of his young shoulders. "Mr. Washington," he said quietly, "so that only those nearest could hear, I made assumptions about you when you entered my courtroom. Those assumptions were unfair and, I now realize, potentially harmful." Marcus remained silent, but his posture stiffened slightly. "I've learned something about you today that wasn't in your file," the judge continued. "Something that Dr. Richardson shared with me during our recess." Marcus looked confused. "Your essay," Judge Harmon said simply. "Justice Beyond the Bench. Reforming Georgia's Juvenile Courts." It won the State Bar Association's student writing competition last year. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. "I was one of the judges for that competition," Harmon continued. "The entries were anonymous, just numbered manuscripts. I scored entry number 47 the highest. That was your essay, wasn't it? Yes, sir, Marcus said quietly. In that essay, you argued that juvenile courts should focus more on rehabilitation than punishment. You cited research showing that detention often creates career criminals rather than correcting behavior. Judge Harmon's eyes never left Marcus's. You wrote that judges who fail to consider the whole child, their circumstances, their potential, their humanity, are failing not just the child before them but society as a whole. A murmur ran through the courtroom. I remember thinking that. Whoever wrote that essay had wisdom beyond their years, the judge admitted. I never imagined I'd have the author standing before me in my courtroom 3 months later. Marcus remained composed, but his eyes glistened with unshed tears. You were right, Judge Harmon said simply. And today, I nearly proved your point by becoming exactly the kind of judge you criticized in your essay. He cleared his throat and raised his voice to address the full courtroom again. It is the finding of this court that juvenile defendant Marcus Washington would best be served by placement in the Carter Youth Mentorship Program with the following conditions. Judge Harmon outlined the terms: regular school attendance, community service hours, weekly check-ins with a court-appointed mentor, and restitution to Alexander's department store. Additionally, he continued, Mr. Washington will submit monthly essays to this court on topics related to juvenile justice reform. The judge allowed himself a small smile. Given your demonstrated talents in this area, I expect nothing less than excellence. As Marcus returned to his seat, Judge Harmon made one final statement. And Mr. Washington, regarding your sister's situation, Dr. Richardson has informed me that emergency kinship care approval has been granted. You and your sister will remain together under the supervision of your former English teacher, Ms. Abernathy, who has volunteered as a foster placement. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Marcus's carefully maintained composure broke. A single tear traced its way down his cheek. This court is adjourned until 1:30 p.m., Judge Harmon announced, bringing down his gavel point. 6 months later, Judge Walter Harmon sat in the back row of Southview High School's auditorium. The Community Forum on Juvenile Justice Reform had drawn a surprisingly large crowd. On stage, Marcus Washington adjusted the microphone. When I stood before Judge Harmon in courtroom 12B last October, I was certain my future had been decided. Marcus began. I was another statistic, another black teenager headed for detention and, eventually, prison. At least, that's what I thought. Judge Harmon watched as Marcus captivated the audience with his personal story, weaving in research and policy recommendations with the confidence of a seasoned advocate. What I learned, Marcus continued, is that sometimes justice looks like a second look, a deeper examination. Sometimes it looks like a judge who's willing to see the person, not just the offense. After the forum, as the crowd dispersed, Marcus made his way to where Judge Harmon stood. I didn't expect to see you here, Your Honor, Marcus said, extending his hand. The judge shook it firmly. I wouldn't have missed it. Your latest essay was impressive, by the way. The one comparing international juvenile justice models. Marcus smiled. Thank you. I'm hoping to expand it for my college applications next year. Georgetown would be lucky to have you, Judge Harmon replied. Then, more seriously, how's your sister doing? Jasmine's good. Ms. Abernathy is helping her catch up in math. And she's sleeping through the night now, which helps. Judge Harmon nodded. And you? The job at Riverside working out? Yes, sir. Manager says I might make shift supervisor by summer. They walked together toward the exit, an unlikely pair, the veteran judge and the teenage former defendant. You? No, Judge Harmon said as they reached the doors. The circuit has a summer internship program for the courts. Paid position. Looks good on college applications. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Are you offering me a job, Your Honor? I'm suggesting you apply. The selection committee would be foolish not to consider you. Judge Harmon held the door open. After all, we need people in the system who know exactly what's wrong with it. Outside, the late April sun cast long shadows across the school parking lot. Judge Harmon paused before heading to his car. Marcus, he said, I've been on the bench for over 2 decades. I've tried thousands of cases. But I've been thinking lately about legacy, about what truly matters in the end. Marcus waited, sensing the judge wasn't finished. When I read your essay last year, before I knew who you were, before you stood in my courtroom, I wrote in my notes, this writer understands justice better than most attorneys I know. I stand by that assessment. Judge Harmon met the young man's gaze directly. Your voice is necessary, Marcus. Don't ever let anyone silence it, especially not someone wearing a robe and sitting on a bench.